I trusted him for 12 years, loved her completely, but what they were hiding. At 28, I believed I had decoded life's mysterious blueprint. My steady job at the electronics warehouse in Melbourne's industrial district, my rock-solid friendship with my mate Sebastian, and the intoxicating whirlwind romance with the most captivating woman I'd ever encountered, everything seemed to align like stars forming the perfect constellation. But sometimes, the universe has a twisted sense of humor about teaching us what we truly understand about trust, loyalty, and the devastating price of blind faith. The autumn of 1995 painted Melbourne in shades of amber and gold, each falling leaf a gentle reminder that change was the only constant in this world. The crisp air carried whispers of possibility, and I found myself breathing deeper than I had in years, as if my lungs were finally learning to embrace hope. Working in that warehouse, stacking circuit boards and computer components that would become someone else's technological dreams wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and left my evenings free for what truly mattered. Sebastian had been my closest friend since we were 16, bonded by late-night conversations about everything and nothing, sharing dreams that seemed too big for our suburban lives. He possessed this magnetic charisma that could light up the darkest rooms, the kind of natural charm that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes. Where I was contemplative and cautious, always analyzing situations from every angle before making a move, Sebastian was spontaneous and fearless, diving headfirst into life's adventures with infectious enthusiasm. That fateful Saturday evening in March, as we stood outside the trendy wine bar in Fitzroy, Sebastian's excitement was practically radiating from his skin. The city lights reflected off the rain-slick streets, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to dance with anticipation. He grabbed my shoulder with that familiar brotherly grip, his eyes sparkling with mischief and genuine affection. "Christopher, mate, there's someone absolutely extraordinary you need to meet," he declared, his voice carrying that tone of barely contained excitement that I'd learned to associate with his most memorable surprises. And then I saw her, Sophia. She emerged from the warm glow of the bar like a vision stepping out of a dream I hadn't dared to imagine. Her auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves that caught the ambient light, and when she laughed at something Sebastian whispered in her ear, the sound cut through the evening's urban symphony like a melody I'd been searching for my entire life without knowing it. From that very first moment, something electric ignited between us, not just attraction, but recognition, as if two puzzle pieces had finally found their perfect match after years of searching. Our first real date unfolded along the Yarra River, where we walked for hours as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples. The gentle lapping of water against the riverbank provided a soundtrack to our conversation, and I found myself sharing stories about warehouse life that I'd never considered interesting until I saw them reflected in her genuinely captivated expression. She listened not just with polite attention, but with her entire being, transforming my mundane daily experiences into adventures worth telling. When I mentioned feeling self-conscious about my worn jeans compared to her effortlessly elegant dress, she laughed, not mockingly, but with warmth that enveloped me like a favorite sweater. "Christopher," she said, her fingers gently tracing patterns on my palm as we sat on a weathered park bench, "authenticity is the most attractive quality a person can possess. Never apologize for being real." Those words echoed in my mind for days afterward, like a mantra that was slowly rewiring how I saw myself in the world. Our weekends became sacred territory, carefully carved out from the ordinary rhythm of work and responsibility. We'd pile into my faithful but aging Toyota Camry, its engine humming a familiar tune that seemed to harmonize with our shared laughter, and escape to hidden corners of Victoria that felt like our own private universe. One particularly magical Sunday, we drove to the Dandenong Ranges, where the mountain air was crisp with the scent of eucalyptus and damp earth. We found ourselves at a small cafe in Olinda, sharing a generous portion of warm apple pie while steam rose from our coffee cups like incense in a sacred ritual. Sophia closed her eyes as she took her first bite, and the expression of pure contentment that crossed her face made my heart skip in ways I didn't know were possible. The afternoon sun filtered through the cafe windows, casting golden highlights in her hair, and I felt overwhelmed by the profound certainty that this was what happiness looked like. "Tell me about your dreams, Christopher," she said softly, her hand finding mine across the small wooden table. "Not just your plans, your real dreams, the ones that scare you because they matter so much." I found myself confessing aspirations I'd barely admitted to myself, opening my own electronics repair shop, maybe traveling to Japan to study their manufacturing techniques, building something meaningful with my hands and mind. She listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like the most fascinating person in the world, occasionally asking questions that showed she wasn't just hearing my words, but understanding the hopes behind them. "You will," she said with such quiet conviction that I almost believed her completely. "We will figure it out together." That word "together" resonated in my chest like a bell that had been struck perfectly, sending vibrations through every fiber of my being. Sebastian remained a constant presence in our lives, always appearing at just the right moments with cold beer and terrible jokes that somehow made everything funnier. At our barbecues in my tiny backyard, he was the one who could turn a simple gathering into a celebration, his laughter infectious as he regaled us with stories from his job at the marketing firm. I watched how naturally he and Sophia interacted, their easy banter feeling like an extension of the friendship I treasured with him. When Sophia's birthday approached, Sebastian accompanied me to the jewelry store, his enthusiasm matching my own nervous excitement. He examined a delicate silver bracelet with intricate Celtic knotwork, holding it up to catch the light streaming through the shop window. "This one, mate," he said with absolute certainty, his voice carrying that tone of someone who truly understood beauty. "It's sophisticated but not pretentious, exactly like her. She'll treasure it forever." His insight into her taste felt like the ultimate seal of approval from my best friend, a blessing I hadn't realized I was seeking but desperately needed. In those moments, watching him help me choose the perfect gift, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude for having such genuine people in my life. "She's transformative, Christopher," he told me one evening as we shared a beer on my apartment balcony, the city sprawling below us like a constellation fallen to earth. "Don't let fear sabotage what you two are building. She's absolutely perfect for you." The first hairline crack appeared on a Thursday evening in June, so subtle I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I'd finished work early, anticipation buzzing through my veins like electricity as I drove towards Sophia's cozy flat in Richmond. But as I turned onto a tree-lined street, my excitement faltered like a record player suddenly slowing down. Sebastian's distinctive blue Holden Commodore sat parked 3 houses down from hers, partially hidden beneath the drooping branches of an ancient oak tree whose leaves created natural camouflage. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, leather creaking under the pressure, as confusion clouded my thoughts like fog rolling in from the bay. Sebastian was supposed to be at evening classes at RMIT, studying for his marketing diploma. I knew his schedule as well as my own. My mind raced through possible explanations, each one feeling less convincing than the last. Maybe he was visiting another friend in the neighborhood. Maybe his classes had been canceled. But even as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, something cold and unwelcome settled in my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. I sat there for 10 minutes that felt like hours, watching, waiting for some logical explanation to reveal itself. None came. Eventually, I drove away, the surprise I'd planned dissolving like sugar in rain, leaving behind only questions I wasn't ready to ask. The subtle signs began accumulating like autumn leaves, individually insignificant, but collectively forming an undeniable pattern that I was still too afraid to acknowledge. There were evenings when I'd call Sophia, listening to the phone ring endlessly into what felt like an empty void, only to have her return my call 90 minutes later, slightly breathless and overly animated as she explained she'd been caught up in a marathon shower or had dozed off while reading. Sebastian started asking increasingly specific questions about our relationship, how often we saw each other, what we talked about, whether we discussed moving in together. His inquiries carried an edge of curiosity that felt somehow invasive, though I couldn't articulate why. There was something in his eyes during these conversations, a flicker of knowledge that danced just beyond my understanding before he'd flash that familiar, reassuring grin that had always made me feel safe. Each small inconsistency felt like a tiny tear in the fabric of my carefully constructed world, and I found myself working overtime to stitch them closed, desperate to preserve the beautiful dream I was living. I was so intoxicated by the euphoria of finally feeling truly happy that confronting ugly possibilities seemed like voluntary destruction of paradise. The night everything shattered arrived with a kind of cruel irony that life seems to specialize in. It was a cold Tuesday in August, winter rain hammering against my apartment windows with relentless percussion that matched the growing unease in my chest. Sophia had canceled our dinner plans, her voice thin and fragile over the phone as she explained that she'd succumbed to a vicious flu that left her feeling completely drained. "I can bring you soup," I offered, genuinely worried and wanting nothing more than to care for her. "Or medicine, or just sit with you so you don't feel alone." "That's sweet, Christopher," she replied, and I could hear exhaustion weighing down every word. "But I'm absolutely contagious, and all I really need is sleep." Rain check for Thursday? Concerned but understanding, I decided to salvage the evening by calling Sebastian. hoping we could grab a beer and maybe catch the football match at our usual pub. I dialed his number with anticipation, but was greeted only by the hollow sound of endless ringing. No answer. No callback. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and with each droplet, the weight of accumulated doubts pressed heavier on my shoulders. Suddenly, like lightning illuminating a dark landscape, the image of his blue Commodore parked on her street rushed back with startling clarity, a memory I'd been suppressing for weeks, refusing to examine its implications. My heart began hammering against my ribs with such violence I could feel it in my throat. Instead of driving toward my local pub for solitary contemplation, I found myself steering through the rain-slick streets toward Richmond, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Her apartment glowed like a warm beacon cutting through the sheets of rain, every window radiating the kind of cozy comfort that had always felt like home to me. And there, bold as brass and unapologetic in its presence, sat Sebastian's blue Commodore in her driveway, raindrops cascading down its windshield like tears I couldn't yet shed. My legs moved mechanically, carrying me through the rain that immediately soaked through my jacket and plastered my hair against my forehead. I approached her living room window, where a narrow gap between the curtains provided a sliver of visibility into the world I thought I knew. My breath fogged the glass as I pressed closer, creating small clouds that quickly dissipated, much like my remaining illusions. What I saw through that window didn't just break my heart, it obliterated my understanding of reality itself. Sebastian stood behind Sophia in her familiar kitchen, the same space where we'd shared countless meals and conversations about our future. His arms encircled her waist with a kind of natural intimacy that spoke of practice, of habit, of a relationship that had been flourishing in the shadows while I lived in blissful ignorance. She leaned back against his chest with complete trust, her head tilted back as laughter spilled from her lips, the same musical laughter that had made me fall in love with her. He pressed gentle kisses along the curve of her neck, each one causing her to turn slightly until their eyes met with the kind of recognition that lovers share when they believe they're alone in the universe. Their kiss wasn't hurried or secretive, it was slow, deep, familiar. It was the kiss of two people who had been kissing for a very long time, who knew each other's rhythms and responses, who had built something real and substantial while using me as their unwitting cover story. The world didn't just stop, it disintegrated into a billion fragments of crystalline pain, each piece reflecting distorted images of every moment I believed was genuine. The rain continued its relentless percussion against the window, but I could no longer hear it over the roaring in my ears, the sound of my entire life reorganizing itself around this new, devastating truth. I stood there in that rain, completely paralyzed, watching the two people who had meant everything to me exist in a reality where I was nothing more than a fool to be deceived. The sick flu that had prevented Sophia from seeing me was miraculously absent as she moved with vibrant energy in Sebastian's arms. The evening classes that should have kept him across town were apparently less important than this secret rendezvous they'd been orchestrating while I worked late shifts to afford the silver bracelet he'd helped me choose for her birthday. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was existential. My best friend since we were teenagers, the man I trusted with my deepest insecurities and greatest hopes, had been systematically dismantling my life while helping me build what I thought was love. Every piece of advice he'd given me, every reassurance about Sophia being perfect for me, every moment of seemingly genuine friendship had been contaminated with this hidden agenda I was too blind to see. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't scream or break things or demand explanations. I simply turned and walked back to my car, each step feeling like I was moving through quicksand that was slowly pulling me under. I drove through the rain to the Westgate Bridge, parked overlooking the city that had once felt full of possibility, and sat there as my entire understanding of myself crumbled like ancient parchment exposed to flame. The Melbourne skyline blurred through my terrace into abstract shapes of light and shadow, beautiful and distant as a postcard from someone else's life. I realized with crushing clarity that this wasn't just about catching my girlfriend cheating with my best friend. This was about discovering that the two most important relationships in my adult life had been elaborate performances designed to manipulate my trust while they built something real together. Sebastian hadn't just stolen Sophia from me. He had handed me the key to my own heartbreak, encouraging me to fall deeper in love while knowing exactly how it would end. Every conversation where he'd urged me not to let fear sabotage what Sophia and I were building had been him ensuring I'd be devastated enough when the truth emerged. Every moment of his friendship had been poisoned by this secret he was keeping, this alternative life they were living while I played the role of unwitting third wheel in my own romantic story. As dawn crept over the Yarra River, Painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold, I sat in my car and felt the crushing weight of absolute solitude. The crisp autumn air that had once promised new beginnings now felt like the cold breath of an ending I never saw coming. I was 28 years old, and I had just learned that the people closest to you can become strangers overnight, that love can be an elaborate lie, and that sometimes the most devastating betrayals come wrapped in the familiar faces of those you trust most completely. The warehouse would be opening soon, and I would return to stacking circuit boards and components, but now I understood something about human nature that no amount of education could have taught me. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones capable of destroying us most completely, not despite our trust, but because of it. And sometimes the hardest lesson isn't about losing love, it's about realizing it was never really there to begin with.